There's no easy way to say this, but some content creators are lying to you about the Arkhe mechanics. I normally try not to be confrontational when I address misconceptions in the game, because a lot of times those misconceptions are born out of ignorance around the mechanics in the game. However, there seems to be a concerted and intentional effort on the part of some content creators to convince their audiences that Fontaine characters are required to deal with the Arkhe mechanics. They are not, and in many cases, altering a team comp to include a Pneuma or Oushia aligned character may even be suboptimal. So let's talk about it. First, let's give a brief explanation of the Arkhe mechanics. The Arkhe system consists of two alignments, Oushia and Pneuma. When one comes into contact with the other, it causes annihilation. If it helps, you can think of it like cold water and hot oil. Adding more water to water doesn't do anything, adding more oil to oil doesn't do anything, but combining the two will cause a grease fire. Currently in game, there are three types of enemies that have relevant interactions with the Arkhe system. Those are the Meks, the Primus, and the Coppelius boss fights. If you're just here for the bosses, there will be timestamps for each type of enemy, but I strongly encourage you to watch what I have to say for all types, because the context will help you better understand the interactions with the other enemies. The Meks and the Dirge Coppelia boss fights really have no significant interactions with the mechanics for combat. To explain a bit further, when all but one mech aligned with Pneuma or Oushia comes into contact with the opposing element, it will enter low powered mode and will become unable to use elemental attacks. It can still attack, but it won't do elemental damage. The enhanced mech is a little different. It gives nearby mechs 20% attack and increases their elemental resistance by 20%. And restores annihilated Arkhe. Now, allow me to explain why Arkhe doesn't matter for these enemies. Right now in the game, there are three characters that can use the Arkhe mechanics: Hydro Traveler, Lenny, and Lynette. Each of them applies their Arkhe to a single target, which triggers an internal cooldown that prevents them from applying their Arkhe again for a set amount of time. 6 seconds from Lenny's charge shot, 9 seconds for Hydro Traveler, and 10 seconds for Lynette. Lynette and Hydro Traveler's skill cooldowns are actually longer than their Arkhe intervals. Mech enemies can either be Oushia or Pneuma. So if you bring one of the units, you can generally annihilate one enemy per rotation, possibly two with Lenny. Out of all the enemies, the one that would give you the most benefit to take out early would be the Enhancer. If you take out any of the other ones, the Enhancer will just reactivate their Arkhe, thus defeating the purpose of breaking it. In addition to that, it raises their resistance, which lowers your damage. Here's the thing, the mechs only have 10 res to begin with, and you don't have to use Arkhe to take them out. Spiritus and Venerer already lowers their resistance by 40%. Once you get below 0% res Shred becomes less effective. So let's say you're using Lynette. Putting VV on her already lowers their resistance below 0%, even with the buff. You should also have a VV unit in your Lenny team, so his alignment isn't that useful. How about in Dendro teams with the Hydro Traveler? Well, Deepwood already does the job for Dendro. That's also giving the benefit of the doubt that the mech is actually aligned with the opposite Arkhe. If it's the same Arkhe as the character, they don't get annihilated. You might also be interested to know that the highest HP mech enemy has the same HP at level 100 as a Rifthound Whelp, with a lower base resistance than that Rifthound Whelp. So hopefully you can see how bringing a Fontaine character to deal with these elements is far from necessary. However, what about the Primus and Coppelius fights? We'll start with Coppelius, since that's probably why you're here to begin with. Coppelius has a phase where he gets a Cryo Shield. If you hit the Cryo Shield with Oushia, it destroys the shield and ends the phase. Ha! So you need a Oushia unit. No, you don't. It's a Cryo Shield. You can also break it with reactions. Oushia does it in one hit, which you only get one, so it wouldn't make sense for it to need two. However, the neat thing about Cryo Shields is it's not just Cryo, it's Cryo with a tiny bit of Hydro. Basically, it's a frozen shield. That means in addition to melt, crystallize, and superconduct, you can also shatter it with heavy attacks. Hydro and Cryo do nothing because they're already on the enemy. No reaction to be had. So why wouldn't you just bring Pyro to deal with it like you would any other Cryo shield? There is one reason: when Lynette breaks the shield with Ousia, it ends the phase. If you break it with anything else, it will refresh after a short period of time. Haha, gotcha! So you do have to bring Ousia. No, you don't. Post edit Souldapop here. One thing I forgot to mention is that if you do bring Lynette and a Pyro team to break the shield, you end up swirling Cryo with her, and that can make your setups harder. So yeah, that's actually worse to try to bring Lynette just to break the shield in that team. Unlike other Cryo shields, this one is really, really weak. If you break it immediately, which any Pyro team will likely do during the setup in their rotation, or with the first N1C from Hu Tao and Double Hydro, you have 15 seconds before the shield refreshes. It does so after Coppelia returns and Coppelius sends her out again. So the shield will more than likely be down for the entire DPS phase of your rotations. So why would you bring a unit just to end the phase that will lower the overall effectiveness of the team when the team can just deal with it the same way, if not even better, than they'd be able to handle other Cryo shields? Not to mention, it doesn't prevent them from entering the phase again, but that's neither here nor there, because they probably won't even get the chance. Let me explain. The boss is really, really, really weak. At level 100, it only has 832,000 HP. If that seems like a lot, let me explain why it really isn't. The typical threshold for DPS a team should have for Abyss 12 is around 30k DPS to complete a chamber in 90 seconds. And that's on the low end. So if we take a 30k DPS team, it would only take them 27.7 seconds to kill that. Even if he started in that phase, which is likely because he's pretty much guaranteed to insta-die if he doesn't. It takes 40 seconds for him to enter the phase otherwise. It'd take most teams at that level of investment 2 rotations to kill him. An important thing to keep in mind though is that he has over 300 resistance at the start of the fight, so maybe wait until he can actually start taking damage to, try to do damage to him, similar to the Mago Genki. Wait, so does that mean Arkhe is pointless? No, it's actually great, but not for the reasons you might think. Remember how I mentioned earlier that Hydro doesn't weaken Cryo shields? Think about the Cryo Abyss Heralds. If you were to bring something like Mono Hydro against them, you just wouldn't be able to kill them. You'd have to entirely rely on your Animo unit to break the shield, and that all but guarantees that you wouldn't clear in time. However, if you make Lynette your Animo unit in something like Mono Hydro, suddenly you can fight a Cryo shielded enemy with a team that was pretty much incapable of clearing that content before. I don't know about you, but a unit that enables teams to be able to clear content they were unable to clear before actually sounds kinda great. That said, I wouldn't recommend other teams you normally wouldn't use against it, like Mono Cryo, Animo Hyper Carries, and Freeze. They've got 70% resistance to Cryo and Animo, plus bosses can't be frozen. What about the Coppelia version of the fight? Again, the same teams aren't recommended. Not only does that version have the same resistance, but rather than getting a shield, she gets additional resistance during her climax phase. Your VV or Deepwood will be more than enough for the other elements during that phase, but VV for the Cryo and Farazan Gene for the Animo will still be relatively ineffective. They're both basically just target dummies you can stand in one place and wail on. It'd honestly be surprising if they bother putting her version in Abyss. They might do both in one chamber, but that'd be even easier than if they just gave us Coppelius in his climax phase the entire fight. So what about the Primus? It's really the same thing. Even if they survive long enough to get their shields, which they probably won't, you just deal with them the same way you would do any other shield. Both Ousia and Pneuma cause annihilation and break them instantly, but it isn't worth including solely because of that reason. Like I mentioned, the main utility of the Arkhe mechanic is actually a positive. It enables teams that wouldn't be able to clear other contents of that type to actually become viable in that type of content. There are some danker things we could get into about elemental gauge and shields, but that's a bit more than is needed in the context of this video. My main mission here was to dispel the misconception going around that the mechanic is just bait to make you have to pull. The only people baiting you into it are the people telling you that. We're all illogical creatures. It's easy for us to hear something, say, that makes sense, and be satisfied with incorrect assumptions without affording them any scrutiny. It's actually stressful to afford things scrutiny when the explanation satisfies the gap in knowledge. So our brains just go for the easy answer, even if it's wrong. It's really easy for people that want to manipulate you into certain behaviors to exploit, and there's some people pretty blatantly doing it at the moment, so be careful out there. Also, I'm Souldapop. Sorry for the late introduction, but if you like this video, you should subscribe. Literally, most people that like my videos don't. Isn't that weird? If you're not sure about the decision, another video is probably on screen right now. Why don't you give it a watch first if you're unsure? Bye.